On the morning of June 7, 1944, a Graves registration team from the 82nd Airborne waded into a flooded pasture near Coquigny. They counted 19 parachutes lying flat on the water. Beneath each canopy was a body, every man still buckled into his harness. Staff Sergeant George Jacobus led the recovery detail. He later told the division's after-action interviewer something that never made the official report. "We couldn't get them out. The mud had already taken their boots. We had to cut the harnesses and let the bodies float up. Some of them still had their reserve chutes packed. They never even had time to think about a second chance." Jacobus wasn't describing a battle. He was describing a logistics failure that killed more paratroopers in 30 minutes than some German positions managed in an entire week. This isn't the story of brave men beating impossible odds. That version exists everywhere. This is the story of how the odds became impossible in the first place, and who specifically made them that way. The Allied drop zones for Normandy were plotted using the GSGS 4250 series, topographic maps produced by the British War Office based on French cadastral surveys from the 1920s. The contour lines showed a landscape that existed before 4 years of German military engineering fundamentally altered the region's hydrology. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Alexander, executive officer of the 505th PIR, raised this during planning. In a post-war interview archived at the Eisenhower Library, he recalled being told the
aerial photographs showing water in dry mapped areas were taken during a seasonal high water period, and conditions would be different by June. They weren't different. They were worse. Rommel's engineers, specifically elements of the 91st Air Landing Division under Generalleutnant Wilhelm Falle, identified the La Barquette lock system near the Merderet-Douve confluence. By opening these locks and blocking drainage culverts with earthen dams, they raised water levels across 15 square miles of valley floor. The water averaged only 2 to 3 feet deep. Tall marsh grass over 4 feet high grew straight through it. From the air, the flooded fields looked identical to dry pasture. At night, when paratroopers would actually be jumping, there was zero visual distinction between solid ground and a drowning pool. The flooding was not a secret. Between April 15th and May 28th, RAF reconnaissance Spitfires from No. 541 Squadron flew 11 sorties over the Cotentin Peninsula. Interpreters at the Allied Central Interpretation Unit at RAF Mettmann flagged anomalies on at least 3 occasions. A report dated May 12, 25 days before D-Day, noted extensive standing water consistent with deliberate inundation rather than seasonal drainage. The report was forwarded to 21st Army Group intelligence staff. It was filed. It was not actioned. By mid-May, the drop zones for the 82nd Airborne's 507th and 508th PIR had been finalized. Over 400 C-47 flight paths from the 439th and 440th Troop Carrier Groups had been calculated and coordinated with the Naval Bombardment Timeline. Changing drop zones
meant recalculating every flight path, resequencing 800 aircraft across 3 divisions, shifting navigation waypoints away from mapped flak corridors, and retraining Pathfinder teams who had spent weeks memorizing beacon placement sites. The planners made a calculation. Moving drop zones might save a few hundred men from drowning. The cascading delays of a last-minute change could cause mid-air collisions and destroy the entire airborne timetable. They chose the water. Nobody told the men in Stick 14 of the 507th PIR that their drop zone was a lake. Stick 14 was a 16-man chalk aboard a C-47, piloted by First Lieutenant Charles Waller, heading for Drop Zone T west of the Merderet, near Amfreville. On the planning map, it was green pasture. In reality, it was under 3.5 feet of water. When flak hit near Sainte-Marie-Éclise, Waller banked hard and accelerated from the planned 110 miles per hour to roughly 150 miles per hour. The green light came at 01:12 hours. Of 16 men who jumped, 11 landed in the flooded zone. 7 drowned within 4 minutes. Each man carried 70 to 90 pounds of equipment. When a loaded paratrooper hit opaque water in darkness, the sequence was merciless. 3 seconds of impact and disorientation, then 700 square feet of wet nylon settling on top of him. The parachute harness used a single-point quick release, requiring both hands to operate, one hand holding a weapon, the other clawing at wet silk. After 30 seconds, the waterlogged canopy began dragging him
through waist-deep mud. PFC Robert McGinnity survived because he landed in 2 feet of water near a hedgerow and cut his harness with a switchblade carried against regulations. 7 of his friends were found the next morning within 300 yards, all still in their harnesses. The murderette drownings changed American airborne doctrine permanently. Within 6 months, the Airborne Board at Fort Benning redesigned the quick-release mechanism for one-handed underwater operation. The T-5 parachute was replaced by the T-7 with a canopy designed to collapse on water contact. Leg bag attachments were rebuilt with breakaway shackles that separated automatically on hard impact. The intelligence pipeline was restructured so divisional G2 air sections received photo reconnaissance directly, bypassing the Army group staff that had bottlenecked the flooding reports. Major General James Gavin wrote in his operational assessment, "We asked men to jump into terrain we had not adequately surveyed, with equipment designed for dry landings, using maps drawn from data 2 decades old. Every one of those failures was correctable. We simply did not correct them in time." The exact number of paratroopers who drowned that night has never been precisely established. Estimates range from 68 to several hundred. Every single death was preventable, not by courage or training or the human spirit overcoming odds, by someone picking up a telephone in late May and saying, "The drop zone is underwater, so move it." That call was never made. The men of the 507th and 508th didn't die because they weren't brave.
Enough. They died because the institution that sent them into the sky valued its timetable more than their lives. That's not a story about maps failing. That's a story about people failing maps.